Hello, and welcome to another changing conversation on SGS Live, where we're moving to a better, safer, and more interconnected world. I'm PJ Kwong, and in today's conversation, we're going to tackle the following topic. Don't get blindsided by supply chain visibility issues. Sourcing from various parts of the world is increasing. As supply chains become more internationalized, they naturally become more complex, making them increasingly prone to disruptions caused by a lack of supplier visibility. During this difficult time, many businesses are being forced to reduce resources and stop normal operations. Unfortunately, this often includes internal compliance and quality assurance teams. Any reductions in these departments directly impacts overall compliance, especially throughout your supply chain. So, what can be done? Let's find out with my SGS expert guests. Tomas Miko, Director, Industrial and Transportation Sales for Knowledge, and John Tofalli, Head of Business Development, Supplier Risk Management. Welcome to you both.
Hey, thanks, PJ. Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
This is going to be a great session. And by way of introduction, I'd like to ask each of you to tell me a little bit about your roles. So, Tomas, let's start with you. And then, John, if you would please follow.
So, as you said, I am the Director for Industrial and Transportation in SGS Knowledge Division, and I have been with SGS for almost 6 years now.
How about you, John?
Sure. My name is John Tofalli, and I'm the head of business development for the SGS Supplier Risk Management Solutions here in North America. And what that means is basically I work with our clients to help them implement solutions to mitigate that risk. And I've been with SGS now for about 6 years. No, Thomas has been here 6 years. I've been here 4 years. I'm sorry.
You got to tell the truth, okay, John?
I know. Don't exaggerate, right?
So, Tomas, I want to start with you, and I want to ask you right off the top. How does compliance fit in with manufacturing, and really, why is it important?
Well, it all comes down to managing risk. Compliance is a safe way for manufacturers to avoid unnecessary risk. And this also, in turn, protects employees, clients, final customers, and any stakeholders along the way. In other words, no compliance equals taking unnecessary risks.
Okay. John, Tomas just answered the how, and I guess it's up to you to answer the following. Why is supply chain visibility becoming a requirement for global and local organizations? So, what does this mean to you?
Sure. The term supply chain visibility by itself, though, it's kind of a broad statement. To me, it's really more about how suppliers in your supply chain can, import risk into your organization. And there's a lot of ways you could do that. One of them is, you can have third-party contractors that are, coming into your facilities to perform some kind of high-risk activity, or it could be that you're sourcing from, low-cost countries that have known social compliance issues. So to me, a better statement would be, how the lack of visibility into supply chain can affect your company's reputation, profitability, and trust. If you're a seafood manufacturer or a seafood company, you're probably sourcing goods from Southeast Asia or from, Malaysia, Vietnam, that part of the world. And there are known, social issues, social compliance issues, human rights issues, working conditions issues that you need to be aware of. So, there's a lot of different ways you could also mitigate that lack of visibility and risk. One way is kind of to reshore or to nearshore your sourcing to more stable locations, but that can be a little bit of an expensive proposition, and it doesn't guarantee that the new suppliers won't expose you to risk as well. Just because a supplier is in North America or the EU doesn't automatically mean that they're fully compliant. The second way you can mitigate that risk is to create transparency, in your supply chain across all your suppliers and all your locations, so you can make responsible decisions about who you're working with. And you create that transparency by, analyzing the risk areas that are relevant to you and requiring that your suppliers are, they meet or exceed your corporate goals. So I guess a 40,000-foot view, that's what we're talking about today.
Do you know what? I love that. And actually, you've packed a whole lot of information in that answer. So it feels though that we should be looking a little more at the factory quality assessment service. Who is it for? What are we talking about? So, Tomas, if you could maybe weigh in on that for me from the services side.
Sure thing. So factory quality assessment is a way for a purchaser of a product or a part from a supplier to know that the product has been built with all safeguards in mind and that the product that is produced comes out with a consistent high quality. it protects them from selling a faulty product, right? And that's the same on the corporate social responsibility side. The audits are done so that everyone involved or interested can assess that the factory doesn't infringe on human rights or against local labor laws, and also doesn't damage the environment. These are usually requirements to be able to sell to major retailers and final consumer product companies.
So I guess is the short answer the fact that you're looking at many different factors when you're sort of doing a quality assessment? Would that be fair to say?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, could you expand on that maybe a tiny little bit?
Well, so we are looking at the quality management system of the company, right? We're looking at that they have all the procedures and documents in place that are about quality, so that everyone can follow it. We're looking at the training of the employees. We're also looking at that the company that says what they do actually does what they say, right?
So it sounds to me like you're really digging deep, in other words, which is exactly kind of what we're talking about here. And, I usually don't do it this early, but I wanted a chance to sort of bring our audience into the conversation at this point. So we're going to have a little bit of a poll question. And for the audience, if you'd like to put your answer in the chat window below, here is the question. So no doubt, uh, we live in interesting times. So with that in mind, how comfortable are you with the compliance that that is and will be required with global regulations? A is very comfortable, B is getting there, or C is help. So I want to know again from our audience, how comfortable are you with the compliance that is and will be required with global regulations? A, very comfortable. B, getting there. C, help. And while we're waiting for our audience to weigh in, I'm going to ask each of you to maybe give me an example of what an obstacle to compliance might be. I mean, John, can you think of one?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few actually, but one that jumps out to me always in a lot of situations is resources within an organization. A lot of companies, they need to be compliant, they want to be compliant, but they just don't have the manpower or the bandwidth to do it. I had a client mention to me that it takes one person one day to gather all the documentation and information they have for one client. Now, I mean, that might be a little
Wow.
bit of an exaggeration, maybe a little bit, but still, you could see the challenge there, and trying to do something like that at scale can be almost impossible.
Well, if I can
What?
jump in, another
Yeah.
factor, important factor, is cost of compliance, right? Companies don't want to spend more than they necessarily have to. It's it's just the nature of organizations and humans as we are, go the way of least resistance. But then, not paying to be in compliant costs you a lot more, right? Because you're not compliant, and in the end, the
Yep.
benefit outweighs the risk, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It cuts both ways.
Well,
Yep.
exactly. And the benefit obviously is universal. So whether people really want to do it, they should do it, and they are doing it. It looks very much from our audience responses that most people are very comfortable with a few getting there and only one. There's a help right there. So this is great. And thank you to one and all for sort of joining us, because it's a very interesting conversation. So, Tomas, I'm going to get back to you. I'd love for you to give me some examples without naming names of the kinds of companies and situations that you've worked with.
Well, the companies that I work with come from any walks of life, really, from apparel companies, electronics, transportation equipment, there's medical, pharma, you name it. Because they all need to prove compliance in order to be able to sell their products and not have their name associated with abusive or unsustainable labor and production practices.
I think we can all agree that there have been instances out there in the world of companies who've gotten their names in the papers and not for the right reasons. So I guess it leads me to my next question, which is for John. What happens if product quality and safety are not seen as key priorities for the consumers? How far down the road do companies have to go before they are at risk for non-compliance?
Unfortunately, not very far, PJ. I think quality from a consumer perspective and, safety from an employee or a supplier perspective are table stakes. If you don't have that, you don't have much of a business, honestly. Consumers expect that the products they're buying are sourced to produce sustainably and responsibly. Truthfully, at the end of the day, that adds value to your product. And always keep in
Yeah.
mind and remember, no one knows or remembers the name of that lettuce supplier, but they do remember that Chipotle had a huge issue, with that lettuce, and it hurt their business tremendously. So it's really all about brand protection, keeping your name out of the papers, and there's tons of examples around the world that you can get of that.
So I guess for both of you, is the bottom line, rather, is this dedication towards, correct procedures, is that outweighing the bottom line, or are they still sort of neck and neck? And really, what is the cost if your names do get in the papers?
Yeah, I mean the valuations to companies, we've seen valuations get hurt by things like child labor, and tens of billions of dollars where the valuation of a company gets hurt. People get put out of business. So yeah, it's definitely a concern. There are companies out there that are altruistic; they're doing it for all the right reasons. But when it affects your bottom line like that, sometimes you're forced to do it.
Yes,
We
exactly.
read.
I totally agree with John. It's all about the bottom line, right? Companies are there to make money. So the way to prevent any unnecessary leakage is being compliant.
Well, and those sort of situations that are negative, they do live on in infamy for quite a long time. I mean, I think of a couple of situations that are as long far back as 40 years ago, sort of without naming names, but we all know sort of the same stories. So, John, what impact is new global legislation having on companies when it comes to compliance and sourcing? I know it's a big topic, but if you can do your best to fill us in.
Sure. No, it's a huge topic and it's a major concern for companies. There's new legislation and there's new regulations. Have made supply chain transparency and compliance a legal requirement now. So you really don't have much of a choice. There's legislation coming out of the EU. There's legislation coming out of Germany and other countries. It's growing every day and it's expanding to affect everybody everywhere. The challenge, however, has been there's a steep learning curve to understanding that legislation and how to comply. And there's a few examples I can give you. One that you probably know about. It's relatively new, not that new. It's the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, or the LKSG. I'm not going to try and pronounce it in German because it's got too many letters, and I'll definitely mess it up, so I won't try. But what it does, it
And we don't
requires.
have enough time.
No, we don't. It's really, really long. It requires German-based organizations or foreign companies with subsidiaries or operations in Germany to do a risk analysis to identify, forced labor or other human rights abuses in their supply chains. At that point, they then need to put in place risk management and mitigation solutions for their direct suppliers, their indirect suppliers, as well as for their own locations. Now, in 2023, this applies to companies with 3,000 or more employees, but in 2024, it goes down to 1,000. Also in 2024, it now becomes mandatory for you to start reporting your findings on human rights and environmental risks in your supply chain. And if you're not compliant, the consequences start out by being excluded from public contracts for up to 3 years, and then fines of up to 2% of your global turnover or revenue. So it's pretty stiff penalties. And this is really impacting pretty much across all different verticals. Whether it would be food, retail, automotive, manufacturing, and a lot of others as well.
So before I ask you to go on, I have a quick question. And is that are you finding sort of globally that, you mentioned that German regulation. Are you finding that companies are taking other regulations that they're finding globally and adopting them for themselves,
Well, it's not that they're
or
adopting.
versions of it?
There are
Yeah.
some the company, the regulations may begin in Germany and then they'll expand to the EU and then it'll expand to other parts of the world. But yeah, that's actually there's been that trickle down effect, or whatever you want to call it. But that's definitely the impact for sure.
So as far as this, the impacts, I'm sure that there's lots more information to share. As I mentioned, it's a huge topic. So can you give us any more information, any more details?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely more examples, and there's a ton. One that's not really new, but companies are still struggling to comply with is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act out of the U.S. Or the UFLPA. This one's been in effect since I guess January of 2022, so it's a little bit over a year. But the goal is to ensure that U.S. companies are not supporting or funding forced labor through goods or services that have been produced in that region of China. So now, what that means is U.S. Customs can seize your goods, stop them from entering the country if they believe that they were manufactured or produced, using forced labor in the autonomous zone. Um, and what that means to you now also is that you now have to show evidence that your goods were not produced in the autonomous zone, or that they prove conclusively that they were not produced using slave labor. In either case, it could be kind of difficult to do. And this really is affecting mostly companies that are either in the sourcing cotton or cotton products, but it also affects people that are sourcing solar panels and solar batteries, things like that. So I guess
Is there a deadline about 2025 that I heard about in terms of reporting?
for the
Well,
UFLPA,
something,
actually,
or this,
there's
yes,
well, there's another example I can give you, which is
yeah,
relatively new, and that's the CSRD, the Corporate
okay,
Sustainability Reporting Directive. And what that one does, it actually combines the current EU, financial reporting, the annual reporting that companies are required to do, and it combines it with the sustainability or ESG requirements that we have now. So in addition to that financial reporting, you now have to include information on your environmental policies, on your social issues, human rights, biodiversity, anti-bribe, all the ESG requirements, and you roll it up into one. And like the LKSG, this is affecting about 50,000 companies that have operations or subsidiaries in the EU. The good news about this one is then, like you mentioned, 2025, it doesn't become mandatory, so you still have time to get up to speed and understand the regulation a little bit better.
getting up to speed is what's important. And I'm going to bring
Yeah.
you guys up to speed to the fact that we have the best audiences who come to these SGS lives, and they are global. And if you take a look at our comments, you'll see that we have people from Cape Town, from Chile, from Turkey, Algeria, Thailand. I mean, really all over the place. And we want to thank you one and all for joining us today about this amazing session talking about not getting blindsided by supply chain visibility issues. Don't forget, there's going to be a Q&A at the end of this interview segment. Feel free to drop your questions and comments in the chat. And I want to remind you that if you want more information, we have a QR code for you to scan. We're here with my guests, Tomas, Miko, and John Tofalli. Don't get blindsided by supply chain visibility issues. It'd be great if I could say it. We're here with our experts to really talk about it. Okay, John, I'm
Yep.
staying with you. There's our QR
Okay.
code. Can you give me some examples of what you would recommend to companies who are either just getting started or need assistance in becoming compliant?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you want to do is really define what your starting point is to become, compliant. Go out, educate yourself on what the new or pending legislations are, understand which ones actually apply to you, and then you can prioritize where to start. Keeping in mind what your company's resources, your capabilities, and your challenges are. Once you've done that, now you can start determining what kind of data and information you want to collect from your suppliers. And there's a ton of information you can ask for, whether it be documentation or questionnaires or whatever it may be. But you got to keep in mind that they have their own challenges and limitations as well. So, the more challenging you make it for them to comply, it's going to have a direct impact on with the acceptance rate that you get. Just make sure that if you're asking for a piece of information, it's providing value. Don't just ask for something for the sake of asking. So once you've done that, now you can develop the supplier engagement plan. And it's really, really important to go out and explain to your suppliers, why you're starting this project, what they can expect, and what the value is to you and to the, you and to the supplier as well. You obviously need to understand the who, the what, and the where of your supply chain, so you can target, the suppliers who have some inherent risk based on, where they are or what they're doing, kind of like that seafood example that I just gave you. And obviously, you can build this project on your own and engage with your suppliers directly. But again, most organizations, like I said before, don't have the resources or the bandwidth to do something like this at scale. My recommendation: go out there, explore the technology solutions that are available, and determine if they can support your internal efforts, or maybe it's a solution that can manage the entire process for you completely, like SGS does. And I think at the end of the day, these 3 steps are going to give you a framework that'll help you, pinpoint your needs, develop a plan to enhance transparency, your visibility, and your compliance. And I guess at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, right?
Okay, recommendations. This brings me into my next question. So thank you for that, John.
Sure.
Tomas, this is for you. So the assessment has been done and the grading or evaluation of the results in this or any other audit has taken place. Broad strokes. What are the steps involved in the execution of recommendations? Where do you and your team fit in?
So actually, on the assessment side, we as GS come in at the very beginning. We do the assessments and we provide the grading and scoring. So if all checks out, the report is provided to the requesting party and all is well and done. But if not, that's when the problem becomes for the supplier, because then they have to correct what they didn't do correctly for the first audit, and a follow-up audit usually follows in a certain time period for the factory to address and fix all these non-conformities, right? So if they do well on their follow-up audit, then it's all corrected, and then they're good, right? But if not, then well, the recommendation is really to do another follow-up audit, maybe after that, depending on how severe the findings are, or just drop them as a supplier and find another one if they cannot correct it anymore.
So it sounds to me like you are there every step of the way. Is that a fair assessment?
Pretty much, yes.
You know what? That's going to give people lots of confidence. And I'm going to ask you both to comment on this next question before we go into our Q&A. And again, a reminder for our audience, if you want to join in with a comment or a question, please do so in the chat window below. So historically, SGS has been involved in the testing and certification business for a very long time. How are the services that we're talking about impacting or helping our customers recover and ultimately thrive? Tomas, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. So again, it helps them manage risks from not having a faulty product all the way to not appearing on the front page of a national newspaper with a headline stating that they employ sweatshops elsewhere in the world.
Yeah.
And obviously, both of these scenarios, as you can imagine, would ultimately eat into their bottom line.
Okay, John, what about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Our supplier risk management solutions help clients identify and mitigate risks in their supplier base and their overall supply chain. It's kind of like a tagline that we have. But as I mentioned earlier, and like Thomas just mentioned as well, nobody wants that bad press or get their names in the papers because it destroys companies and their valuations, and it has some pretty serious effects. So having the ability to mitigate that risk is the key.
Wonderful. Just before we go into our Q&A, you'll see a QR code in the bottom right hand of your screen. That's where you can scan, and it will take you to a location where you can get some more information. So we're ready for our Q&A. This has gone by so quickly. I'm with my guests, Tomas, Miko, and John Tofalli, and we're talking about not getting blindsided by supply chain visibility issues. Okay, John, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
How does the knowledge of legislation as well as internal policies and procedures play into the situation for helping our clients?
Knowing what legislation impacts you and your business, you have to. It's critical. You don't have a whole lot of choices. If you're doing business in certain parts of the world where where compliance is legislated, you have to do it. I hate to be that blunt, but it's true. So, I guess if you manage it internally on your own, if you have the ability to do that, terrific. Or to use a third party like SGS, either way, it's got to get done.
Okay, fair enough.
Yep.
Tomas, this is a question for you. A potential customer comes to you with a problem to solve. What happens next? And what are the timelines around getting them up and running with an audit and subsequent recommendations or solutions?
Well, it all depends on what solution is requested and what the client's timeline is. We always try to accommodate even the most aggressive timelines. It also depends on where the assessments are to take place and how busy our auditors are servicing other clients in the geographic area of the world. And the process is like this. We gather the necessary information on the solution requested and the factory to be audited. We provide the availability and pricing, and if the client accepts, then we deliver the audit as promised during the scheduling process, and then deliver the report and findings and or follow-up audit if they don't comply.
Again, I love the fact that you're there every step of the way and that you have sort of a procedure sort of laid out that helps our customers. So this final question is really for both of you. Can you each highlight some examples of the types of SGS audits that have helped clients address their product quality or supply chain issues? John, I'm going to ask you to go first, and Thomas, please follow up with your thoughts.
Sure. Again, I'll let Thomas speak to the audit portion of that. But from a supplier risk management perspective, we work with clients in pharma, automotive, food verticals, retail, really all, and not only just different verticals, but different applications as well. So we work with, it could be your suppliers, it could be your partners, it could be contractors. Again, it's a pretty flexible platform, and we worked across all of those. And that's not just for supplier risk; it's also for supply chain mapping, which might be a conversation for another day.
Amazing. I can't wait for more conversations, John. Tomas, what can you tell us about that?
So on the audit side, there are many different types of audits. There are social audits, quality audits, even security audits for high stakes products and materials. They all have different versions or different schemes that vary slightly. It all really depends on what is requested and who is requesting them in order to be compliant with certain ordinances and or laws.
Amazing. Do you know what? Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop things here. This has been just a fascinating conversation, and I would like to thank my guest, John Tofalli, Head of Business Development, Supplier Risk Management, and Tomas Miko, Director, Industrial and Transportation Sales for Knowledge, both from SGS, for filling in the gaps in our knowledge and in our topic. Don't get blindsided by supply chain visibility issues. I'm so glad that you, the audience, have been here today. If you want more information, make sure that you scan our QR code, and that will take you to the page where you can get more information. And we just want to thank you for joining us. I'm PJ Kwong. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Great. Thank you, PJ.
Thank you.